Okay, welcome to another episode of the Rest and Recovery Podcast. With me today is Senior Vice President of BioStrap, Elias Arjan, also creator of BioHackers Collective, a community focused on optimizing health, and an avid biohacker, as I understand. So, welcome.
Yes. I wish I could claim that I created the Biohackers Collective. Actually, that was James Cadwell, but I'm the organizer of the LA chapter, and I act as the executive director for the organization, which is scattered around the world, with little collectives of biohackers around.
Awesome. So how'd you get into biohacking?
I mean, I always say that I was a lifelong biohacker, before the term existed. For me, ideally, what happened was I was I was a personal trainer in college, and I was a triathlete. And so what happened was I just started to test myself, like what were the things that I could use to optimize my athletic performance. And then I had a bunch of clients that were kind of depending on me. They'd be like, is this protocol good? Is this program good? What's the best nutritional supplements, these sorts of things. And back then, this is over 20 years ago, it was a pretty cookie cutter approach to fitness, right?
Sure.
Like, there would have been like three options, right? Like you had three programs as a personal trainer, fat loss, muscle gain, and maintaining. And that was it. Like biohacking didn't really, getting into the N=1 type of stuff back then. It was just like, this is the program for everyone. A lot of people were still following things like the food pyramid. We kind of just didn't know any better.
Right.
And I guess for me, what happened is I started to notice things like I would give the same program to 5 different people and they would all have different results.
Right.
And I would start wondering, why is that? Like I'm doing the same thing as a trainer. I'm giving them the same type of nutritional advice. I'm training them the same amount of time, and they're all having wildly different outcomes. And that kind of led me down the path of trying to understand why, which has been a 20-some year plus journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a never ending journey too, as I'm finding out is, we change, our physiology changes over time. And so there's the constant tweaking that you're going to have to do within yourself. And I guess there's always new things to tinker with and try out and go down the rabbit hole with.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And I actually think biohacking even changes kind of by, I wouldn't even say by decade. I think you need to kind of break it into like life stages in some other way. But yeah, it definitely is different depending on where you are in your life cycle. A lot of the top biohackers that I see are still in their 20s and 30s. And I just think, you guys think you think you're biohacking, give it 10 or 20 years, 30 years, see how much of a kick-ass biohacker you are then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you, especially, I don't know about you, but post kids or in the midst of kids and sleep deprivation or whatever's driving the change in life dynamics plus aging.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're solo, when you're a 20-year-old sort of just living your life and you got all this energy and you sleep and all these other things, it's easy to claim like I'm totally optimized, and then, like I said, I've even seen some of that in some of the forums or even on Instagram, people commenting, in their 40s or 50s, saying, yeah, try biohacking, my life, in that sense. So I think there should be a bit more realism in biohacking personally, in that sense. But I feel like it's still a great space to be in. I mean, I love it. I love the idea of it. I even love the term because it suggests something that is maybe even a little subversive. And I think in a society where we have almost 60% of the population unhealthy, we kind of need to subvert the system, right? So like you need to hack the system because the system is not your friend if that's the norm.
Yeah, because the one size, or as your example earlier, 3 sizes doesn't fit all. And right. you can't. I've always said we're all walking chemistry sets. And so you have different genetics, you have different backgrounds, you have different responses, even geographies, and the food you eat are going to affect you differently based on the region and etc. So it's definitely an evolutionary thing, and it's kind of encouraging that it's getting a broader or awareness, I should say.
Yeah, and I mean that's the other thing that's really interesting. People don't even think about some of the things. So you have the genetics, you have the epigenetics, you have the geography, you have the psychometrics, which is I'm also a psychometrician in my professional life, which people don't even talk about in the biohacking space,
I was going to say,
which is
what is that?
that's the psychology. That's your
Okay.
individual psychology
Hmm.
quantified. So it's a quantification of your psychological makeup, basically. And so, so the same protocol, even if you had all these other factors, similar genetics, similar geography, but similar different attitudes, you might have different outcomes.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
don't even think about that in the biohacking space. It's a little so biologically orientated, and then you have the people who talk about the psychology of, epigenetic expression, but that opens up a whole nother can of worms. And I think a lot of biohackers don't want to go there. So they just kind of like ignore it,
Yeah.
because it's easier to ignore it because you open that up, then all of a sudden you're just in this whole thing around, what is thought, what is consciousness, does spirituality impact what we do as biohackers? I mean, it really becomes a quagmire when you open that, but I think we can't ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Probably because it's not as easily measurable, but you go into the headspace and we're still so, um, it's still the gray matter, right? That there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to the mind and how it responds, it seems, at least what from my seat. So you're starting at biohacking. So how did you get to the point of being at BioStrap?
So it was actually really interesting. It was, I moved to LA, I guess around 3 years ago, moved to Southern California, and I was just looking to kind of, meet people, not knowing anyone down here initially, came here for work. And I said, maybe I'm going to go start a biohacking group. I mean, I was getting more, the term was starting to kind of have more traction. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can start a group. And I went and looked, and there was already a group on Meetup here in LA, from the Biohackers Collective. So I reached out to them and I said, hey, it doesn't look like anyone's managing this LA chapter, and I'd be willing to help rather than start my own. So I joined in, started producing events, and I guess in around March of 2019, we hosted an event with Samir Santike, who's the CEO of BioStrap, and the two co-founders of Apollo Neuroscience,
Okay.
Catherine and David. And so it was all about HRV. And I just love, it was probably one of our best events to date at the time. And then I also loved the idea that the Apollo product hadn't been released yet. They were kind of sharing the future of it. But BioStrap was on the market, and I was thinking as a biohacker, this is exactly what I need to self-quantify, to conduct my own N=1 experiments.
Yeah.
And so I was immediately interested in what they were doing. And then I one thing led to another. We just sort of started talking, and several months later, I accepted the role as senior vice president. So, and I've been with the company. I guess it will be a year come September.
Okay. Awesome. Well, it sounds like a fun journey. So you mentioned it was right in your sweet spot of your areas of interest on being able to quantify yourself. So maybe we can break down BioStrap and how maybe it's a little different than some of the things in the market based on my research and reviewing it compared to some of the other wearables out there, which seems to be a growing market,
Mm-hmm.
exploding market, really. Um, kind of the differentiating factors around BioStrap and the metrics that it measures.
Yeah, I mean, not to, I guess, obviously I'm somewhat biased, I guess you could say, but I
Sure.
think ultimately, if you're a biohacker, I mean, BioStrap's really kind of just an ultimate device. It's not for everyone, to be quite honest, like a lot of general consumers who don't want to get that deep into data analysis, probably not for them. I mean, they're better off, sticking with their Fitbit, or their Apple Watch, because they don't want to go that deep into data analysis.
Right.
But if you're a biohacker and you want to really dial in, exactly what is the right dose of that CBD to, impact my deep sleep and raise my HRV, consistently by, 20%.
Right.
BioStrap really allows you to conduct that level of self-experimentation that you can use almost like your own, N=1 clinical trial, and and for anyone listening who doesn't understand how you do that, one of the important things to understand is that you can't take 10 supplements at once and quantify what they're doing to you, which is one of the biggest things I encounter in biohacking. A lot of people are like, oh, what are you taking? Oh, I take this for sleep and that for sleep and this to wake up. And I'm like, well, is it working? And they're like, I think so. And it becomes this like subjective unknown. And what I think is fascinating is people will spend $400 a month on supplements and not know if any of them are working. They've never done a single test.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can say I've been guilty to that point where you're searching around for the different things, and you honestly, you probably start getting into the like FOMO method of fear of missing out, or just whatever the next new shiny thing is like something pops up in your feed and you're like, ooh, maybe that'll help. Even though I'm like halfway through the last bottle of the other thing and you haven't even figured out if that's working yet.
Right, exactly. And even if you are thinking it's working or not working, I mean, are you just relying on subjective data? Like, I think I feel better. Unfortunately, the mind is really good. Being a psychometrician, I can tell you that one of the most powerful things that in our reality is our mind. So that's the whole placebo nocebo effect, right? If you think this thing isn't going to work, it won't work. If you think it is going to work, it is going to work. So you can self-report from a subjective aspect whatever you want it to be. Right. So you could be driving yourself to have better sleep, taking a sugar pill, believing that it's going to make you sleep better. I mean, that's a pretty amazing thing, right?
Yeah.
So, what I like to do is find things that I try to neutralize that by doing my own experiments with BioStrap. So it's like I can take the supplement and then I can see exactly, does it affect my metrics at a neurophysiological level.
So how is it that it's able to get more data on it? I did notice, I'm kind of half answer my own question, but notice that you have multiple units where a lot of times the Fitbit, it's just the one unit, or components where you have like the foot pod and the wrist and the chest strap and things of that nature.
Yeah, there's multiple devices, but it's more even just about the way the data collection is done. One of the things that's really interesting that a lot of people may not realize is that the sciences behind nocturnal data collection is being a better way to understand our own neurophysiology than continuous data collection. So for example, a lot of people are really attached to this idea that, they just hit the button on their Fitbit or Apple Watch and they go, oh, look, my heart rate is at 94 beats per minute right now. So what does that mean? It's 2 p.m. on a Wednesday and you're at 94 beats per minute. What does that mean? You know what that means? Nothing. It means absolutely nothing. It just means it's a snapshot in time without context and without looking at trends and variation. Mm-hmm. It means nothing.
Yeah.
The only two times that your biometrics really provide the most insightful understanding is nocturnally and during activity and immediately post activity, right? So, so nocturnally when you're sleeping, if your biometrics are changing while you're sleeping, good or bad, that is indicative of many different things, depending on what's going on. I mean, right now in this sort of COVID era, we're involved in some research because you could be showing signs of developing some type of, we can't identify COVID, but we could talk about a respiratory condition because there's things changing in your biometrics, and that shows up days before you would have symptoms. So that's when you're pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic. So by the time you actually are sick, it's kind of too late, and especially in terms right now, everyone's worried about spreading this. But your biometrics will change at night, and that is more indicative of a transformation than temperature, because you could just be running, you could be coming in, it's 100 degrees here in California, Southern California right now, you come in from outside, I scan 101, well, maybe I was running to get into the hotel because I was hot, and then the door will slam in my face and won't let me in, and also too, some people run cold, some people run hot.
Right.
So we don't even talk about that. The fact that the variation of temperature is actually quite wide. Women's temperature, changes with ovulation cycles.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things, so really all that matters is trends over time relative to your own baseline. Comparing yourself to a general population is not, is maybe going to give you some insights. A lot of people are competitive, so it's like, oh, I want to be in the top 15
Right.
percentile.
Yeah.
My resting heart rate is better than your resting heart rate. My HRV is higher than your HRV. Well, some people just, maybe their baseline HRV is below the norm, but they could be incredibly resilient. It's just a factor of the way their neurophysiology is wired. So you can't
Yeah.
always look at these. And HRV is definitely one of the most important metrics, but also one of the most misunderstood and probably the most difficult to quantify as well.
Yeah, and honestly, you're speaking my language right now, is because I've been using a device that's tracking all of that, and I'm trying to make sense of it to include heart rate variability. And I don't know how many times I've reread the definition, read articles,
Right.
and I'm still scratching my head like, okay, it's like the most important thing, but it's like this squishy thing that keeps slipping all over the place. I just don't even understand.
Yeah, because there's all these things. You once you go down that rabbit hole, you start looking in low frequency versus high frequency versus very low frequency, and then you start to see really weird things. And I'll give you a real life example of something I encounter, with us as a company. Is somebody who was admitted to the ER, and their HRV shot over 100, and this is somebody who said their HRV had never gone over like 45, and so they were in a crisis, and the way their body reacted at that particular moment for that particular individual was they put them in a profound parasympathetic state to deal with the crisis. So you would think, if HRV was a equals B scenario, you would say, oh, this person is incredibly sick and their HRV is going to drop down. But
Right.
it actually went higher than it had ever gone.
Wow.
And that was their body's way of kind of protecting them. Their fight or flight reaction was actually to create a high level of parasympathetic activation to deal with the situation.
Wow. Fascinating. It goes to show you, like we were saying, each individual is different in how we're going to respond to things.
Yeah. So that, and again, I mean, I've heard of other cases of this, and I've talked to physicians because I work with a lot of physicians as part of what we do, and that's not entirely uncommon. They will see sometimes in people admitted into the ER where their HRV is shooting up to deal with crisis, right? So what we would think fight or flight, HRV drops. If we're going to flight, going to fight or flight, not always the case. So that's where it becomes, like I said, a very confusing metric where you can't always say, high is good, low is bad. High is better, and low is worse. It could mean a lot of different things. You need context. You need to look at the individual. You need, a lot of extra data points.
So what are some, in a 101 version, HRV defined? What are the components that kind of aggregate up to give you that number?
Okay, yeah. For anyone who's not familiar with this, a very important metric that we couldn't measure through wearables previously, but it's basically all humans, and this is not something that's unique to any individual. All humans have what's called an autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system is broken down into the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic is the fight or flight. So when we go into a sympathetic state, we get our body gets ready for fight or flight. So we get ready to face a enemy or a threat of some kind. So, we have things where extra blood gets directed to our muscles, the digestion, blood to the digestive organs will slow down significantly so that it is able to be ready for the extremities in case you need to run or fight, for example. And a lot of other things happen to sort of activate the body. You might get some rushes of adrenaline. So the body's in this state of readiness. And the opposite, when you go into a parasympathetic state, which is rest and digest, is fight or flight, your HRV tends to drop. So low HRV means fight or flight. And then the alternate side is parasympathetic activation, and that's the rest and digest, where the blood goes from the extremities to the digestion to digest your food. Your muscles and your overall state should go into relaxation, and you should feel safe and calm, and your breathing would slow, and the HRV would go up. So the interesting thing is that we live in this world where we're always on. So, even when so if you think about it in the past, even just looking at a very real scenario, you finished work at 5, you went home, there was no cell phone, there was no laptops, nobody was bothering you at work, for example, and you could go into a deep state of rest and digest. You would eat your dinner with your family, you'd chill out on the couch, and you'd go to bed. Well, now what happens? You leave the office, or now we're not even going to offices. We're at home all the time, working all
Go
the
up the
time.
stairs.
Yeah, you go up and down the stairs, if that, or in and out of another room. And you never actually get to a good state of parasympathetic activation, which would put you in a state of readiness to go to sleep. And so sleep disorders are just rampant right now in our society. And that leads to all these other health problems, obesity, type 2 diabetes is also, insulin resistance is tied to sleep. You're not producing hormonal balance unless you're getting good, enough sleep at night. Also, even cognitively, if you don't get enough REM sleep, you're just gonna probably be, a little bit cognitively brain fogged, or just even unhappy, angry, or cranky. So
Yeah.
it all fits together. It's a complex puzzle. And HRV is probably one of the best metrics we have to look at where you are in that cycle. And so that's why monitoring HRV matters. Sorry, that
Awesome.
was an extremely long answer.
No, it's a great explanation of it. It's very helpful. It certainly is for me anyhow. So what other areas within the BioStrap are being monitored? You have HRV, so the resting heart rate, I presume, is another element of this.
Yeah. So the four key biometrics we're monitoring is heart rate, right? Specifically resting heart rate nocturnally, which is been a long time indicator of athletic fitness, right? So athletes are often almost even competitive about who has the lowest resting heart rate, because that just means the heart is well trained. It needs to pump less to get blood to the body at rest, because it's so well trained and so well developed as a muscle. So resting heart rate variability, which we just explained, respiration rate, so how rapidly you're breathing while you're sleeping. And then one of the things we do, it's different than most other wearables, is the SPO2. So the blood oxygen saturation on the wrist, which is for most people is not, most people are, between 96 and 99%. If you have sleep apnea or any other type of respiratory conditions, though, this metric can fluctuate more. And so a lot of people need to know what that is.
Right. Yeah, I did notice that it was interesting that you were able to monitor that. How accurate is that? Because historically, when you get those little ones that you put on your finger from CVS or wherever, um, those are the measurements on your finger, so it's able to do it off the wrist.
Yeah. We the way the sensor has been set up on the wrist, we're actually taking the measurement directly from the artery, because we're using an IR and red light sensor. So it's actually shooting all the way into the wrist, just in the same way a pulse ox does it off your finger. So we've actually been clinically validated. Our four key biometrics have been done by no less than Massachusetts General with Harvard Medical School and the San Jose State University Biomedical Engineering Lab have validated the metrics that we use. So
Okay.
we can claim, as we often do, clinical validity in terms of what we're doing, which a lot of people don't even realize that most wearables actually don't do that. Most consumer wearables, you have FDA cleared clinical and medical devices that have undergone validation, but there's no requirement that requires your Fitbit to be accurate. And people don't realize that. So anybody could release a wearable. There's a lot that right now the market's being flooded with cheap wearables, and people are making health decisions with them. And again, I don't want to sound biased, but just even as a health practitioner of any kind, that disturbs me. Just
Yeah.
because I don't want somebody to decide what supplement to take or what exercise program off of a completely inaccurate wearable. I mean, you're just bad data is going to lead to bad outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. Especially when, like you're saying, you're dealing with your health, and that's just an example of maybe good intentions misapplied.
Yeah.
Relying
Yeah. And
on.
you think even now, like, people, because of COVID, buying temperature, sensors and pulse oxes and making very major health decisions around these. And, again, there's no requirement for any of these to be valid. There's no requirement that says you have to sell an accurate pulse ox. You have to sell an accurate temperature sensor. You can just buy them on Amazon or wherever, Alibaba, and, God knows what you're getting.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing that that's the case. That it's not more stringent when it comes to certain devices like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be a FDA cleared device or a clinically validated device, I mean, there's some wearable companies that have put in the time and effort, like us. We're not the only one
Sure.
to be clinically validated, but we're one of the few, to be quite honest. There's not a lot of people doing that. Even some of the big names, Apple Watch has clinically validated its ECG, but hasn't validated anything else as of yet. And they're Apple, I mean, the biggest company in the world, right? So
Right.
it's not easy to do this stuff.
Yeah, there's considerable investment. Not that I know the degree, but I'm sure when it comes to that, I've been involved with some other devices that took a while for FDA clearance, and you just got to go through the process and before you can kind of release it. But once you get there, I presume it's something to be proud of.
Yeah, and it's on our timeline, where it's on our path. We are working towards achieving that ourselves, because it just seems to be, it's just very important. If you're going to be trying to help people make health claims, we're continually working to validate our metrics, to do more clinical studies, to improve our algorithms, to improve our sensors, and just really provide a high quality product and good data to people. Because if you make, I think it's essential.
So, what makes the BioStrap different? You mentioned red light. So, I know for others that you often see green light. So,
Yes.
what's the difference between the two, and why is that important?
Well, so this is a very interesting conversation that probably anyone outside of the wearables market space doesn't even know. But there's different ways to do biometric extraction to get the biometrics from the human body. And green light sensors are great. We use green light sensors in our heart rate monitors, our external heart rate monitors, that we ingest that data, because we need that if someone's working out, running, moving, very active. So green light is much more effective when you're moving. It gets good data to some degree, but it also has its limitations, meaning that your data integrity can slightly be reduced. It's less sensitive to light movement, and a lot of people don't even know this. It's also less accurate the darker the skin and the more freckles, hair, or tattoos that you have. So if you have someone who has extremely dark skin or tattoos around their arm, and they're using a green light based sensor, their data quality is going to be significantly reduced.
Really?
Yeah, this is a complete unknown. There's even an article, people can go look it up, is your Fitbit racist? So if you have extremely dark skin, you actually are going to get much lower data quality. And given what's going on in the world right now, then this is a really big issue, because we're finding out that green light sensor wearables, to a certain degree, you could almost say there's an element of that danger in there in using them
Wow.
for certain populations. And again, no, people don't know this. So that's the trade-off. So the green light's good for making these measurements, but it has limitations. And most of the FDA cleared medical grade devices tend to use red light to avoid this problem and to improve the data quality and the data integrity. The trade-off there is red light is sensitive to movement and light. So you have to be relatively still. That's why we focus on nocturnal biometric collection, because the red light is going to do a very good job of getting your data while you're sleeping and you're relatively still and in the dark. But if you were running in the sunshine up a hill using our main biosensor, we're probably not going to get enough data. That's why we also have secondary devices.
Like the chest strap and
the shoe pod.
Shoe pod. Okay.
Yes. So like if you're running up the mountain and you're wearing the shoe pod and you turn on the activity feature, we can look at the cadence of your run and your steps, and we can get a very good count of that. If you're cycling, we can see the revolutions of your bike off of a shoe pod and the cadence of how fast you're revolving.
Okay.
So it's another way to get that data point, because even if you're doing arm sways off the wrist for steps, it's not going to be that accurate. But if it's right on your foot or on your ankle, you're probably going to get better, accuracy of data. So for us, it's all around, how can we get the most accurate data possible?
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's I had no idea on the difference in light and the pros and cons to it, but it makes sense why green was probably more prevalent and could be used across.
It's also, honestly, it's also a less expensive sensor.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is it cheaper?
It's cheaper. So you can mass produce green light sensors. And so again, that's one of the things. So the market is being flooded with these green light sensors. It's just like even for biohackers in the biohacking space, the same thing with red light devices, right? You have the name brands producing red light, and then you have just, just factories just mass producing the same products. But some of them aren't, there's no requirement for those other red light devices to have low EMFs or to have even good quality light devices. So it's the same thing. Like a lot of these green light wearables are just being mass produced, thrown onto the market, and it's a lot less expensive to produce. Red light is hard to work with. That's why it tends to be a medical grade device when you're using red light.
That makes sense. So you mentioned kind of the quality and around the device. So when it comes to the metrics and what you're capturing on, say my profile around data privacy aspects, do you guys take that into account because you are dealing with, medical information and how that is managed? I know it's a big thing right now.
Yeah, it is. In fact, actually, we are currently been working on developing, because we are involved in some clinical trials. So we kind of have had to already sort of de facto have things that are like HIPAA compliant, where you don't even see who the individual is. It's like a long form kind of like blockchain type of 10 to 10 plus digit number that is identified with the person. So we are extremely careful with that. One of the other things to keep in mind, I don't know if you even heard this story. I mean, the Department of Defense stopped using Fitbit because they were getting hacked, and you could track troop movements through their Fitbits.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah. So we don't even have a GPS in our device. So we use a GPS on the phone, but it's not embedded in our device. So if you decide to record something and your phone is not nearby using the onboard memory, we have no idea where you are. We can't track your movements. We don't track your GPS unless you tell us you want us to, because you're working out and you want us to track your run or your cycle. We'll track you. And that's through the app. That's through your phone. That's not even in the device.
Right.
So we have no GPS tracking. We have no, essentially no tracking functionality of any kind. And, obviously, I'm sure you can't say that of Apple and Google, in terms of how they're doing things.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, definitely not.
Take that and take all of that into your thoughts as you think about what wearable you want to have. Remember, we thought Facebook and Google were free. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not free. We've just become the product.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a rabbit hole for another day. Well, no, that's encouraging to know, because that's one thing that, weighs on my mind, even as I try things. And I've used, some of the originators of wearables like Garmin for a long time. I'm a runner, and so I've always used that. But it's important to know that, some of that stuff isn't ending up like some of the search engines and things of that nature out there.
Yeah. So Garmin is great because if you really want that good GPS functionality, I mean, it's great. It's built
Yeah.
into the wearable, right?
Right.
And so, that's the thing. We're not trying to be Garmin. We're not trying to be Fitbit. I mean, that's the
Sure.
other thing. We get compared to them, but we're actually trying to do something different. We're trying to give you a high quality of data analysis that is clinical or as close to medical grade as you can get with a consumer device to empower you, your fitness trainer, your physician, your healthcare partners to improve your health. We don't have GPS functionality. We will never sell user data. We do invite people to sometimes even participate in sort of clinical research if they want to, but it's always an opt-in decision. We did a whole study when COVID happened. We invited our users if they wanted to share their, data anonymously for the purposes of better understanding how this, disease was impacting their biometrics. They could opt in, but
Sure.
we're not doing that unless we get explicit permission. Um, we're very careful about that, and that actually is very important to me and basically everyone in the company. We take that. Trust of having people's biometric data very seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust. Well, that's a key word, right? Because I think that's a word that's been fractured in a few pieces in many domains of life right now. So that's encouraging to know, and especially as a user of a couple different devices. So, um, how long is kind of the lifespan of a device? Have we gotten there yet, or?
It seems to me like I think have high functioning lifespan. I would say that's probably true of any of the wearables in the space. Um, I mean, we actually do have some users that I've just been amazed with BioStrap, who have purchased, one of the very early devices, and they're still using it every night, and it's like I think almost 3 years old,
Oh, cool.
and they're happy with it. I can't make that promise that's going to happen for everyone. I mean, probably just like anything else. I mean, some people have a car that's 2 years old and it's trashed, and some
Yep.
people have a car that's 2 years old and looks brand new.
Yeah.
So, it kind of is also up to what the user does with it.
Sure.
So the life cycle. I mean, we do have a 1-year warranty on on our main device. So
Awesome.
we do our best to, and we do honor that quite regularly if anyone does have issues.
Yeah. Um, Elias, we're kind of coming up on time. I'm super grateful for the conversation. It was really helpful to understand how you all are doing it differently, the importance of the data, and where kind of the industry is kind of going, and being able to really help individuals understand themselves better. So
Hmm.
it's really, really cool. Before I close out, though, I wanted to ask a few questions, personal questions, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So, what are you reading right now?
Actually, it's funny. The book's actually right behind you. I am one of the books I'm reading because I usually have a couple on the go at once. Is Boundless by
Okay.
Ben Greenfield. I was at his book launch here when it was in LA. One of the
Oh,
last
cool.
times we could still be here in person,
Yeah.
and so that was done in partnership with Next Health, which great group of people down here in LA. So that's something I'm going through because I'm actually kind of been working on some of my own sort of biohacking protocols just by popular demand. People are asking me for more information these days. So I'm looking at, Ben has put something pretty amazing together there. Um, I do a lot of Audible. So does that count? Is
Yeah, it
part of
does.
what I
It
listen
does
to?
for me. If it wasn't
Yeah.
for Audible, I don't know if I'd be reading a lot of books.
So I mean, I guess I finished this book, but I want to give it a shout out that I think every biohacker or any person concerned about their health should read is something called The Hacking of the American Mind. I think that is a must-read book. It should almost be forced on, every teenager before they graduate high school. They have to read that book, and it talks
Okay.
about how our culture has been sort of subverted into a dopamine-dependent society. In the relationship between, dopamine and serotonin, and how it's completely changed our brains and society. So I would definitely want to give that book a shout out.
Okay. I will look into that myself, and on Audible. What are you listening to right now, whether it be music or podcast?
Podcasts. Actually, one of the ones that I listen to that is maybe a little bit different than some people is something I listen to, something called The Skeptic's Guide to the Galaxy. Although maybe a little outside the typical biohacking realm, I'm pretty more on the hardcore science side of the biohacker, and so I feel like a lot of biohacking, does go into a little bit of the fluff, and it's very pseudoscience. So I like listening to what the skeptical and the hardcore science people are saying sometimes. I do lean that way a little bit myself in the way I think about things. Don't always agree with them completely, but I like this group because they kind of also make it quite fun. And they actually have a great, the book. They also have a book as well as a podcast that I've been enjoying.
Awesome. What is your go-to rest and recovery method?
Oh, geez. I mean, for me, that's a long list. There's a lot of different things I do.
Favorite?
One of the things I love right now that I'm using very regularly, we also are doing I guess, I don't know when this is going to air, but we're doing a partnership with them is with Theragun. So the percussive therapy, doing that is really, we're going to be releasing actually a study that we did with them and the outcomes of the impact of percussive therapy on sleep and recovery. So that's a great product that I'm enjoying. I think a lot of CBD, but you got to dial in which one works for your body, because not all CBD is the same. I would probably say 90% of what's out there is junk. It's not full spectrum. It doesn't really impact you. And then it could work great for me, but not work for you, Scott, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So we need to dial in what's the CBD that works for you.
Yeah. And how much?
And how much? Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I had a previous guest on who, from Pure Spectrum, Brady Bell, and talking about the different degrees and how much and what's the best starting point and things of that nature. So, cool. Well, Elias, again, thank you so much for your time, input, and insight. I'm grateful for you taking that time and sharing all your knowledge. So, grateful.
No, I'm grateful for being here, Scott. I really appreciate you, and I hope any of the listeners, got something useful out of this.
Yeah, appreciate it. Take care.